Hello, everyone. This is your girl, Sade, and welcome to another episode of the Win in STEM podcast. I know, it's been a while. I've been transitioning into a new job and taking care of a couple of things, but we are back with a new episode. So thank you for tuning in. As you know, Win in STEM is a platform to highlight successful people of color STEMists to show others how to get a seat at the table and win in science, technology, engineering, and math. On today's episode, we'll be discussing technical interviews with our special guest, LaKiesha Tomlin, who is a career consultant, speaker, and founder of Thriving Ambition Incorporated. Thank you so much for being here today, LaKiesha.
Thanks for having me, Sade. I'm excited to be here.
So, audience, we know technical interviews can be terrifying and there's so much to learn, and nobody really enjoys answering technical questions on the spot in front of complete strangers who are deciding your career future. But today, we'll deep dive into interviews and give you some tips and tricks on nailing them. But before we get started, one of the things we do on the podcast is to allow our guests to introduce themselves. So basically, unapologetically telling our listeners who you are, what you do, share any accomplishments, all the good stuff. So this is your time to shine, LaKiesha, and the floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks so much, Sade. So, as Sade said, I am the founder of Thriving Ambition, and I help engineers and project managers find new jobs without applying online so they can increase their impact and income. And prior to this, I was an engineering hiring manager in the aerospace and tech industries. And then, in addition to that, at the moment, I'm currently a executive MBA student at the Yale University School of Management. So I have my hands full these days, but I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's a busy season right now, so I appreciate you spending time with us today.
Yeah, totally.
So, for STEM opportunities, I know there are different interviews. So, what type of interviews do you usually conduct?
So, for engineering positions or technical positions in general, I typically conduct behavioral interviews. So, that's essentially where they ask you a question such as, tell me a time when, or something like that, when it comes to looking at your past history and just basically trying to connect the dots between what you've done in the past and how you can help them going forward. And I also know that software development has some interviews where there's the portion that is a problem solving portion, and then they'll also have the behavioral portion as well. So there's a lot of different interviews out there, but those are the two most common types of interviews when it comes to interviewing for STEM opportunities.
Mhm. When it comes to the interview process itself, what can a candidate expect? How do they prepare? We need all the details. How can they be most prepared before they go in front of a group of strangers who they have no information about?
Okay, so how much time do we have? I could talk about this for a long time just because being a hiring manager for engineers, I've seen all kinds of people come through, and some people just knock it out of the park. They're amazing. And then some, I look at it as, oh my gosh, I just wasted, 45 minutes of my life on this. So you definitely don't want to be that person that has or that makes that hiring manager feel the second way I talked about. So
Mhm.
for the so for the behavioral portion, typically you will have an interview with a hiring manager, maybe another manager, and then people from the team who range from junior or more senior level engineers. And there may be panel interviews or one on one interviews. And depending on the company that you're interviewing with, you may have either one or two interviews or as many as 13 interviews in the process.
Mm.
I know Yeah, I
It's
know
a lot.
it's yeah, it is a lot, and it can be very time consuming. Like, this
Mhm,
process could take months and months, especially when you're interviewing at tech companies. And I've had the experience of interviewing at a couple of tech companies and having uh, 13 interviews max, and was offered the position thankfully. But just imagine if I didn't land that or those interviews, all the time I would have wasted, or I would have felt like I wasted going through that entire process that took a couple of months.
mhm. So within each round, were there any differences, or do they ask you um, different types of questions, or were they more behavioral in a sense to see what type of person you are, your work ethics, and things of that sort?
Yeah, most definitely. So it was actually a combination. So I've had panel interviews, and I've given most of those where it's me and maybe three or four other people. But then I've also had one on one interviews with prospective employees. So, and then also in my experience as well. So throughout that entire process, no matter which kind you have, they're looking for a few key things, and they are asking you behavioral things like, basically they're trying to figure out, can you do the work? So for instance, if you don't have the technical skills that they're looking for, then maybe you have some more work to do. And
Mhm,
they're also looking for how well you fit within the organization. So I've conducted interviews where I've asked a question like, what are your hobbies, or what kinds of things do you like to do outside of work? And I remember being in an interview myself where they asked me a similar question, and I said that I like wineries. So, just
mhm,
being, a little transparent in terms of
mhm,
giving them a peek into your personal life. Don't share too much, please don't. But, giving them something where basically they feel like, not only can you do the work, but you're also a human being with other hobbies outside of just working. And
mhm,
they're also looking for a couple of other things like dependability. So when times get rough, are you willing to go above and beyond to help out? And they're also looking for team building and leadership skills. Although you may not have led teams formally, they're looking for times when you will rise to the occasion when it's required. And I'll say that this is a struggle for some engineers where they focus so much on the technical, don't really talk about the soft skills, and just know that the interview process is not just about the technical, it's about the soft skills as well. So definitely give that some more thought when you go into these interviews.
mhm. That makes sense. Let's say for someone who's in college right now and they're going on series of interviews for internships or maybe even a full-time job, and they don't have that experience, what should they be doing now to help themselves be more marketable, to help them in the interview process? Or even you mentioned soft skills, what are ways that they can increase their soft skills so once they get the interview, they can shine and show that, yeah, they're good technically, but they're also good on a personal level. They're able to work well with people.
Yeah, so definitely at that level, when it comes to internships, you want to have some volunteer experience, and you want to try to get some volunteer experience where you can hold a leadership position. So, for instance, I remember when I was at that level, I was part of the junior chapter for National Society of Black Engineers, where I was a team leader, and I was able to help students who were in middle school and high school with applications and all kinds of things. So that was a leadership position. And I remember using that experience as something to leverage when I was interviewing for internships. And you also want to make sure that you have some projects. So if you really want a technically focused interview or technically focused position for an internship, you want to have some side projects. Did you build something? Did you create a piece of new software? What did you do? So basically, you could volunteer and do things on your own in order to demonstrate not only the technical capability, but the soft skills as well.
Mm. Yes, that's definitely important. When I used to do recruiting at career fairs, I usually brought that up as well. Use leadership experiences with different STEM organizations on campus, if it's
Hmm.
NSBE or SHEP or IEEE, or it also doesn't even have to be STEM related. If it's like, the Black Student Organization,
Hmm.
or maybe a community service club on campus, something that shows that you can be a leader and that you are able to work with diverse people with backgrounds, experiences, definitely help because that's something that you will do in the workforce.
Hmm.
And also, projects are a major key. And if it's a side gig that you do, if you make websites for fun, that's also something else that you can put on your resume, or if you're part of a robotics club or things of that sort. Definitely can be used as experience if you don't have the whole, internship lined up yet.
Absolutely.
Thanks for adding that point. What are your favorite questions that you usually ask in a technical interview?
Yes. So every interview, I used to keep a list and I would distribute this interview packet to my team, and they could look at the packet or they can deviate from it. So it was kind of a mix. So, of course, the questions that you may get inside of an interview could be almost anything. But generally, when I was interviewing, I would ask about five different questions. And the first question, every hiring manager asks this, something like, can you run me through your resume? And this is essentially your elevator pitch or your value statement. So instead of just talking about, yeah, in 2015, I did this job, you could talk about that, but you also want to talk about how it added value to the company that you were working for or the department. So basically, you want them to connect the dots in their head how your past experience can help them in the future. So that was an obvious first question that I always ask, and everyone is asked in an interview, but it's so important to start off strong with that first question. And there was other questions that I asked. So something like, what would you describe as your greatest achievement to date? And that was basically, I wanted to know what were they proud of professionally. Now,
Mm.
I got all kinds of answers when it came to that in the interview, but if you're going to be asked this question, make sure that you keep it professional. I would
Yeah.
hear stuff like, I'm a father. I'm like, okay, that's amazing, but so are many other people. How is that? How is that helpful to me as the hiring manager? How is it helpful to the department? So another question I would ask is, tell me about a time when you faced conflict. What happened and how did you handle it? And the hiring manager is looking for how you resolve interpersonal conflicts under high pressure situations, mainly
Mhm.
because when I was leading these departments, it wasn't a question of if you would run into conflict, it was more of when, especially because a lot of the work that we did was high paced, high pressure at times. There was a lot of work coming through, and I needed people who could not only get the work done, but also keep their cool, because the last thing I want to do is break away from my busy schedule coming to a situation, trying to diffuse the situation between you and somebody else. So
Yeah.
um, it's like, unfortunately, I've had to do that a couple of times as a manager, but it's never fun. It's never fun confronting people, but I need to know that you can keep your cool when the time calls for it. And the fourth question I would ask would be, why do you want this job? So obviously, we're all here for money. So
Yeah.
uh, putting that in your answer, it means nothing because everybody wants money. That's why you're working. But basically, you need to make sure that it's something that is not obvious. And
Mhm.
the last question I would ask would be something like, what does continuous improvement mean to you? And I was asked this question in an interview because I was interviewing for a management of quality position which continuous improvement is always at the top of mind in that department. But I started asking it in every single interview because I'm interested in your outlook on optimization. I want to know that you're always thinking ahead. How can we take some process or system or something that we have here in a department and make it better so that way we could increase efficiency or something. I'm always looking for efficiencies. I was always that type of manager trying to do things efficiently and not just stick to the status quo. So I know I kind of gave you a long list here, but
No, it's
those are
awesome.
about
It's awesome.
There's about five things that I would definitely ask in an interview, and typically these interviews, depending on the company and a whole bunch of other factors, the interview time may go from about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and
Mhm.
sometimes. I've had a 10-minute interview, and that was basically where it was one on one with someone, and he had to go, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, that's all the questions I have." And then he just walked out the door. I was like, okay. So, the interview experience can vary, but typically it's
Mhm.
about 30 to 45 minutes. And this may seem like a lot of questions, but uh, you can ask so many more outside of this as a hiring manager.
Mm, definitely. And I know there also are resources like glassdoor.com that people can type in the company that they're interviewing with just to see like a preview of questions
Hmm.
so they can be prepared. So, listeners, that's a resource for technical interviews. On the flip side, what type of questions would you expect for the candidate to be asking you in the panel?
Yeah, so that's it's interesting that you asked that question because when I've conducted interviews, a lot of times the candidate won't have questions, which is very surprising to me
Mhm.
because it's if you're really interested in the role, I expect for you to ask clarifying questions. And I think sometimes people are intimidated because, I mean, interviews obviously aren't fun. They're very high stakes situations. So they may not ask the questions that they really want to ask. But a question that I really like is more of something about the work. What was it about it that interests you, and maybe you can ask a follow-up question from there. And let's see, there's another question that I love it when people ask in the interview. It's basically, I mean, you can ask about salary and stuff like that. I would actually save that for when you actually get an offer. But
Mhm.
I want to know more about, see, if I was a candidate or if I was listening to a candidate in an interview, I want them to know, or I would want the panel to know about the future goals of the company. So,
Mm.
not a lot of engineers ask about the future of the company, the financial state of the company, and this may actually throw some of the people on the panel off guard because they don't even know. And
Yeah.
so, if you're asking about the future state of the company, it shows that you care about the longevity of the company, and it also shows that you want to be around for a while. So, that is a great question that you can ask in an interview, and it'll definitely set you apart from everybody else that is interviewing. Instead of I mean, you can ask questions about development and growth, and when people do ask questions, they do ask about that. But the one about the
Mhm.
financial performance of the company or the longevity, that's going to be, you're going to definitely impress people on the panel, especially the hiring manager, because they're thinking
Mhm.
about those type of things themselves.
Definitely. And I would also recommend for the candidates to also do their research on the company as well to come up with some
Hmm.
questions. And even if you might already know the answer about the financial statements and their longevity, still ask the question, even though you know the answer. It shows to the panel, whoever is interviewing you, that you're interested and that you are planning to be at the company for the long run and not just for a short period of time.
Hmm. Yeah.
For candidates who are listening, do you have any particular advice to help them in their interview? Other type of advice that you wish you had known going through interview process? I know you've been through many, so you've improved and have a in on things, but what are some tips that you wish you'd have known in the past that could help someone in the future?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And for engineers that I come across in the interview, one of the key things is to know your audience. So
Mhm.
a lot of times the interview or whoever is setting up the interview, it could be the hiring manager or a recruiter or someone like that, they may list the names of the people who will be in attendance at that interview. So go ahead, take those names and do the research on those people. Because when you do research on these people, you'll find that you actually have some things in common with them, and those are things that you could naturally work into the conversation
Mhm.
or the interview. So knowing who has what levels of experience and background, I mean, obviously you may not be able to find this information on every single person, because there are some people who maybe on the panel who don't really have a social media footprint or a background, just because they don't want that kind of attention. So,
Mhm.
for the people who do have that information and make it available, definitely use it to your advantage. And the other thing I've noticed is that engineers, when they're talking about the past projects that they've done or some prior work experience, they may go way too deep into the weeds on the technical aspects of whatever that job was. So, my recommendation is to keep it at a very high level. And if the interview panel wants to know more about whatever technology or the project you were working on, they'll ask probing questions and they'll ask you to clarify or give more details. So, don't feel obligated to the give the minor details of whatever project you may be describing. So,
Mhm.
I believe that would be the pieces of advice that I would give. Oh, and one other thing, I know we kind of talked about some other things about preparation, but I want to make a special note for people who are interviewing inside of the company. A lot of times when I talk to engineers that I work with in my company, Thriving Ambition, or outside of that, people will say, well, I don't know what to fix because I didn't get any feedback from the interview. So if you're interviewing for internal positions, follow up with that person, especially if you didn't get the job, because they may be willing to share information about what you can improve in the interview. And that information will be so helpful. I know it was for me when I was interviewing years ago, going from engineer to engineering manager and getting that feedback that really helped me improve. So definitely take advantage of that when you're interviewing for an internal position.
Yeah, I definitely agree on both points, especially about the feedback. I remember there was a time I interviewed my past employer for a rotational program and I didn't make it in. And
Hmm.
I asked for feedback, and the feedback that they gave me, I was able to use that information, make myself a better candidate. And the next round of interviews that they did for the rotational program, I was able to make it in.
Oh,
So
wow.
finding out that information can be the key of unlocking your door to opportunities. So definitely ask for feedback within an interview and just day to day work life, right? Or even like in school, ask for feedback from your professors or from your manager at work just to make sure that you are a good student, a good employee, and that once that time of promotion or new opportunities are opening up, you'll be well prepared for that as well.
Absolutely.
And then the other point you mentioned about doing your research, I've
Hmm.
heard from multiple people, once you find out the names, go and search them up on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
find some information about them. And honestly, when I first heard that, I'm like, wait, we could actually look them up. Like, is that okay? But it's definitely helpful, and I think it helps you to see that the people interviewing you are people themselves, so you don't need to
Yeah.
be afraid these people could be potentially your coworkers. So it's good to know their background, their history, just to get a feel of who they are before you actually interview with them.
Exactly. I remember one time I was interviewing for a mid no, it was an early career engineering position, and one of the candidates, he actually looked me up. He found my LinkedIn, he found my YouTube channel, watched some of my videos, and then when he got to the interview, he mentioned that I was very impressed. Although in that situation, this there was another guy that kind of beat him in terms of the interview, but I still remembered that guy. And I remember when I had an opening about 6 months later, I had my recruiter reach out to him. I mean, he already found another job, unfortunately for me, but I was like, man, that dude was so cool because he did the research and I mean, he was definitely talented technically. Like I said, there was
Mhm.
someone else who had a bit more of what I was looking for than him, but that guy was definitely my number two choice if the first guy backed out. Most
Mhm.
definitely.
Awesome. So I know the STEM tech industry has one of the most competitive job markets, especially now during the pandemic. Everyone wants to get into tech. And we've seen a big rise in the demand for tech skills. What can us people of color do to really set ourselves up apart from the crowd?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned everyone is trying to get into tech. And I swear, everyone that I talked to on a strategy call for my company mentioned that they want to get into tech. They want to
Mhm.
go to Facebook or Amazon or Apple or
Yeah.
someplace like that. And I've worked in tech at Apple, and yeah, it's very very challenging. And I didn't realize how challenging it was until I actually got into the industry and I remember my boss at the time saying, yeah, this was super competitive. It got down to, let's see, you and one other candidate who was internal. And I think the number was something like they were considering 80 people for that one position.
Mhm.
So I was like, oh my God. But he said, yeah, you were clearly the top candidate, and obviously a little ego boost from that. But yes, it is super, super competitive. So the thing that really helped, I believe, me and a lot of others that I work with is knowing the industry, knowing the lingo, and being able to talk the language.
Mhm.
Because a lot of industries, well, each industry, not just talking about the tech industry, they have their own lingo. And if you haven't worked in it, it may be hard for you to really understand what that is. So one thing you could do is to read their posts. So they all have social media accounts, read their posts, see what other and a lot of times on these social media accounts they'll have similar companies or something like that where basically you'll see companies that are kind of in the same space and they may publish articles or there may be even books or whatever types of content you want to consume it so that way you could be up on what's happening in the industry and then also know the lingo and it'll be hard for you to know exactly what that particular company's lingo is because I swear when I switch industries from aerospace to tech walking into tech, it was like speaking a whole other language. And I literally kept a spreadsheet that I made available to the rest of my team, made a spreadsheet of all of the acronyms that I learned. And I think by month two, I was maybe over 100 acronyms. And
Oh
sometimes there were
my.
five acronyms for the same thing. And
Mhm.
and I remember this because I kind of got grilled after a meeting for asking what something was and didn't realize that I knew four out of the five acronyms for that same thing. So I said all of this to say know the industry as much as you can if you're an outsider. And also know the challenges that the company may be facing or the division that you're interviewing for because you want to position yourself as that problem solver. People or companies hire problem solvers. And if you position yourself as a person who could solve those problems, it'll be virtually a no brainer for them to bring you on to their company or in their department.
That's a great tip. Whatever industry you want to get into, make sure you know and research that industry.
Hmm.
Awesome. So, last question. I love asking our guests this question. If you can give one piece of career advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Hmm. That is an excellent question. As someone who's done, gosh, I want to say well over 100 interviews in the past, I want to say 6 years. So it's quite a lot of interviewing. I would say definitely remember that the interview is a conversation and not an interrogation, and
Yeah.
that they need you just as much as you need them. So you should
Mm,
definitely ask questions, even if the questions may be hard, and ask yourself internally, of course, do I like this job? Do I even like these people? Just keep it
mm,
real, because you're going to be spending so much time with these people if you're hired, and you want to make sure that it's not only a good fit for you professionally, but also personally, because depending on the job, you could be spending more than 40 hours with these people. You may be going on trips with them to different places. Definitely the last, well, 3 jobs that I've had, even as manager, I've gone on domestic and international trips with my boss, some of my direct reports, and peers. So you really want to make sure that you're asking the right questions in the interview, and that
mm,
these are people that you can see yourself hanging out with. Uh, I mean, you don't have to be best friends with these people, but people that
mhm,
you could get along with for 40 hours or more. And overall, the interview process can serve both parties well, meaning yourself and
mhm.
the interview panel, if you listen, take notes, and ask questions. That would be the advice I would give to my younger self, hands down.
Nice, nice. And one thing I would like to add, for every no, there's always an open door.
Mm,
You might be going through a lot of interviews and you might get a couple of no's, but just keep on trying.
hmm.
There's that perfect job that you're seeking will surely open up. So keep your preparation, keep doing your research, keep pushing through, and that opportunity that you're looking for will definitely come through.
Yes, I love that advice. And to add on to that, because I've talked to so many job seekers, if you're struggling in the job search and you're not quite sure what you should improve or what you need to improve, definitely get some support, because the journey is, it can be rough and it
Mhm.
can be long, whether that's purchasing books or courses or coaches or other resources. Just throwing it out there, I'm available for coaching if you're looking for that. But whatever you do, get some sort of help, so that way you could, ease the burden on yourself a little bit, because the job searching process can be tough and brutal, as a lot of you know. And that's also the story with some people that I work with, people who have gotten to the interview phase but can't figure out, well, how do I crack that interview? Um,
Mhm.
so just kind of keep that in mind as you're going through this as well. There's so many resources and people out there. Definitely ask for help.
Thank you. Thank you so much, LaKeisha. And I know our listeners will be asking for help. So, how can they connect with you?
Yes, most definitely. So, Sade, I also want to provide a resource for your listeners to help them on the job search. It's called 51 Top Technical Interview Questions, and
Mhm.
they can find that at thrivingambition.com under downloads, and you spell the website THRIVINGAMBITION.com under the downloads tab. And then there's some other resources as well, as far as how to answer that tell me about yourself interview question with a
Mhm.
fill in a blank format. So a bunch of resources at thrivingambition.com to help you on your job search journey.
Wow, thank you so much. I'll definitely include that in the episode description so everyone can make sure that they can tap into those resources. But thank you so much for being a guest on the Win and STEM platform. I definitely enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure it will help someone on their next interview. listeners, thank you for tuning in. I know you guys are listening. I've been seeing the numbers coming in from across the globe. Make sure that you rate the podcast 5 stars and like, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, Google, Pandora. We are everywhere. And also make sure to follow us on Instagram at the Win and STEM Podcast and tag us with your favorite takeaway. Tell a friend to come and listen. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the week. And until next time, be great and go out and win in STEM. Bye.